As you know, one of the reasons for this conflict in the chart is a decrease of rainfalls by 40% in the north of the country during the last century, which has led to water conflicts of former coexisting tribes. In this mission, our challenge is to protect civilians, especially refugees, to support the general security situation in order to facilitate humanitarian operations, to support measures for the voluntary return of refugees, to improve conditions for a long-term civilian rehabilitation process, and to secure United Nations personnel, facilities and equipment, and to guarantee their freedom of movement. One of the consequences of climate change are armed conflicts, so-called resource wars, for water, food, arable land, and so on. Researchers show that these consequences will rapidly increase the need for humanitarian operations. Additionally, there will be the need for more peacekeeping and peace enforcement missions worldwide. Secondly, I want to underline that there will be other challenges coming along with the climate change. We will have to be prepared for the rising of the sea level, the melting of the snow caps and glaciers, and the growing number of droughts resulting from it. But not only the number of droughts will grow, but also natural disasters will occur more often. One consequence of this development will be the migration of a large number of new climate refugees to safer parts of the globe. The military will be more and more involved in humanitarian operations, supporting them with security, food and water, sanitation and medical aid, as well as shelter for the affected population. Brigadier General Dr. Hirschmuggel, sitting here among us in the second row, of our Austrian Armed Forces, a board member of the Global Humanitarian Forum, was one of the UN civil military coordinators for the Southeast Asian region during the 2004 Indian Ocean Tsunami. He witnessed that more than 30,000 troops of about 35 states were involved in this relief operation. This example shows us that in future the military must be able to support humanitarian operations everywhere, worldwide, and at any time, in close cooperation with different forces and traditional civilian humanitarian actors of other countries. The new challenge will therefore be collective struggle against the negative impacts on our health and security deriving from natural disasters. We, the military, are often the only ones who have the equipment and the logistical competences needed in the first phase of a disaster relief operation. Thirdly, I want to mention that in Austria, the armed forces have already reacted to the impact of climate change by the military strategic concept paper for military-civil cooperation, and especially the operational concept paper for humanitarian operations. We try to train all ranks in the field of humanitarian operation, and especially in civil-military cooperation. In the future, civil will be one of the most important topics for the military, and it will be necessary to find ways to jointly collaborate with civilians during humanitarian operations, rather by mutual support than by mistrust. We all have our mandate, but for the poorest suffering in the world, we should cooperate, and maybe this panel discussion can be a fruitful beginning. Fourthly, there is not only a need for workshops and meetings, but besides the existing guidelines, maybe even an own charter for this cooperation, like that one, Military and Civil Defense Assets, MCDA, Oslo Guidelines, or a Code of Conduct, and so on. I think that, by all means, we should prepare and improve more and more in the field of interoperability and civil-military interaction. In the Austrian Armed Forces, we try to implement a so-called comprehensive approach. This means that the different actors in the field try to work in a multidimensional way in order to reach more efficiency and effectiveness. As an example, so-called provincial reconstruction teams we created together with the Germans in Afghanistan in order to use all synergies of the existing humanitarian actors as well as the military operating in the field. It is very necessary that politics, economy, the civilian society and the military are able to work together in close cooperation. But also dual use is one principle in our forces, as you can see with the Austrian Forces Disaster Relief Unit, so named AFDRU, which is an NBC unit, but also trained to fulfill emergency response tasks like urban search and rescue, water purification, and so on. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished audience, let me summarize very shortly. The military is well aware of the impact of climate change and is ready to meet this new challenge, especially by the provision of training and other support for humanitarian operations as well as civil-military interactions. I am therefore very glad that I was invited to join this forum, and this could serve as a basis for a multinational and global discussion. It is a chance for confidence building and acceptance among each other by enabling us to help those who suffer of national disasters and or the consequences of climate change. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, General. Well, I'm glad to hear that the military is ready for the challenge, also that the humanitarian people are ready for the challenge. I think the big challenge is now to get them to cooperate more effectively in future. And before I open the floor, I promised I would come back to Robert first. So let me do that. I think also picking up from what Rita said, you know, this was discussed last year and not a lot seemed to have happened since then. And that is exactly the problem we have with discussions whenever there are committees and people sitting down talking all over the world. It's normally a lot of talking and not a lot of doing. I like to be practical, so let's try and unravel this thing a bit today and see if we can perhaps pull the whole thing forward. So before we get on to all the other issues, let's take it from the top. Before we even get to the topic of the debate, as Robert said, the first thing that should be decided as far as he's concerned is whether or not, or when, the question rather, the military should be involved and when they should not be involved. So I think on that one, Robert, perhaps if you could give us your idea. Obviously you have some ideas on that, and then I'll open the floor, we can pick up from him, and then we can take it issue by issue as we try to jot them down today.
Thank you very much. It seems we might actually have a proper debate starting here, which it's great, obviously. In conflict zones, the rules of the game changes, and it's not that simple to have military people conducting humanitarian type operations. For me, Afghanistan is the prime example. The PRTs have been mentioned, and that's a joint military humanitarian type project. Now, to this date, there's no evidence, no sign of correlation between military humanitarian activities and increased security or really increased humanitarian benefits in the region, because these PRTs are extremely expensive. 400 Swedish troops in the Swedish PRT costs more than the entire development funding for the country, which